Okay, Bez Hashem Yisbarach, we're starting today's daf, Kuf Yud in Chulin, 2 lines from the top of the Yomit. Again, we were discussing the story of the Kchal and the Lev, and if there's a difference in how to properly kasher it. So Gemara starts off with the Maisa. Kisel Rebbe Elazar, when Rebbe Elazar went from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechel Zeiri, he met Zeiri. Amalei, he said to him, Ikatan da Asni l'Rav Kchal, is there a Tana who taught Rav his halacha asering a kachal or udder that was roasted without tearing it, like we said before? Now a Tana doesn't necessarily mean a Tana, could mean a Amira who specialized in memorizing and reciting Mishnahs and Braises. So Rav said previously in the Gemara, we learned that Rav asered this kachal. So is there any teacher of Braises who taught Rav his shita that asering an udder that was roasted without tearing it is in Eretz Yisrael? So Achvel of Yitzchak bar Avdimi, they pointed to Yitzchak bar Avdimi. The people of the place pointed to Yitzchak bar Avdimi as the one who had taught Rav the halachas of the udder. The Rashash says that a simple, basic reading of the Gemara would suggest that it was the Iri who pointed to Yitzchak bar Avdimi and not the townspeople. But either way, Yitzchak bar Avdimi said to Rebbe Elazar, I didn't teach Rav any issue regarding a roasted udder at all. V'Rav bika matzah v'geder b'geder. Rav found an open field and erected a protective fence around it. What does this mean? Rav found a tzibur that was totally ignorant of the issue against cooking basa b'chalav, an open field. So he went ahead and was machmer beyond the Ikar Adin, and asked for them all forms of basa b'chalav, even an udder roasted without first tearing it, as a protective geder against any possible violation of this Isser. The Rav Iklal Tatalfush. Rav once visited Tatalfush, not Tatalbaum, Tatalfush. It's the name of a place. Shomali, it's the Kamal Chaverta. He overheard a certain woman saying to her friend, Riva de Bisra Kama Chalva by Levashule, how much milk is required to cook a quart of meat? So that's not a good thing. Omar Rav was shocked, and he said, Lo Gemiri de Basa B'chalav Aser. They never learned that Basa B'chalav is Aser. He akev v'ka'asalahu kachli. He tarried there, he waited around there, and asked them udders. Why? Meaning he ruled that an udder roasted without being torn is Aser even after the fact. So according to this shita that the Gemara brings, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi's answer, in reality, there are no two gersois in Rav's statement, as we originally presented by the Gemara on Kuf Tes Amud Beis. Rather, Rav agrees that me'ikar adin, an untorn roasted udder, is mutter after the fact, as the Brisa says on Kuf Tes Amud Beis. And Rav answered it, not me'ikar adin, but just as a geder, as a chumrah, to stay away from the basa b'chalav, because he saw that these women were not learned in Hilchas Basa B'chalav, and I think that the Musar over here is a little bit along the lines of that like the Rambam says that you shouldn't be extreme, but if you see that the people are not following the Torah properly, it's not that you have to go to an extreme, but you have to show them what's really mutter and what's really aser. Rav Kana Masni Hachi. Rav Kana taught to Yitzchak bar Avdimi's answer that we just said was like this. Rabbi Yesi bar Abba Masni, Rabbi Yesi bar Abba taught to Yitzchak bar Avdimi's response was different. Anok chal shal menika shenisi lei. Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, I indeed taught Rav a brayza, which says that a chal, an udder that was roasted untorn, is aser. However, I taught him that brayza only with respect to an udder of a nursing animal which is fully loaded with milk. So the brayza that I taught him does not contradict the brayza that we mentioned before, which says that a kechal that was roasted untorn is mutter. For that brayza refers only to an udder of a non-nursing animal which contains only a small amount of milk. The brayza that I taught him, however, which asks an udder that was roasted untorn, refers to an udder of a nursing animal which contains a large volume of milk. But Reb Chia, due to his sharpness of mind, taught Rav this very same brayza with respect to an udder without explaining, and that's what led Rav to make a mistake. Reb Chia, due to his keen mind, took for granted that it would be obvious to all that there's no grounds for asering an udder of a non-nursing animal that was roasted untorn, so he assumed that everybody would know this. So when he taught his Talmidim, who he presumed were as sharp as he, this brayza, he didn't bother to qualify it as referring only to an udder of a nursing animal. But what appeared obvious to Rav, to Reb Chia, was not necessarily obvious to Rav. Okay, the Gemara goes, which is an interesting thing, and we know that we always speak this out, that when it comes to the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Hey that talks about the Dinei Hayra of Dayanim, so the Gemara there says that B'cheres, when it comes to being Matir Mumna B'cheres Al Yoira, Rav is not allowed to pass him because he knew the material too well, so he was way ahead of everyone else. And we're seeing over here that Reb Chia was way ahead of everyone else in terms of understanding this concept of the Chal, not specifically the concept of the Chal, but the fact that what they chapped or what they didn't chap based on what he originally taught them. Ravin, it's like the Gemara right to another Maisa. Ravin for Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef iklo leber of Papi. Ravin and Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef visited the home of Rav Papi. Aisul kamay of Tashil Dechal. They brought before them a dish of udders. Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef ochal. Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef ate from it the plate. Ravin lo ochal. Ravin did not take, because we're going to see later that there was a minhag that certain people didn't eat. Abaye said, Ravin tachla my leochal. Ravin the bereaved, why did he not eat? Why is it calling him Ravin tachla? So the Gemara is going to explain. Tichla, which is Aramaic for shochul, means a person whose children died during his lifetime. Ravin's children had died during his lifetime. So that's why he called him that. So Ravin tachla my leochal. Why didn't he eat? Michti, let us see. The wife of Rav Papi was a daughter of Yitzchak Nafcha, meaning Rav Papi was the son-in-law of Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha married Uvdahava. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha was known to be meticulous in his actions, and he was a master of the deed. He knew exactly what he had to do. He loved the Shmilah. Mibnei Nashal le'ava avda. Had Rav Papi's wife not learned from her father's house that an odor is motive for consumption, she would not have prepared such a thing to eat. Abaye was critical of Ravin for refusing to eat what had obviously been approved by those greater than him. Perhaps it was for this reason that he was referring to him as Ravin Tichla, which seems to be a term of contempt. This is interesting. One of the observations that we had in the beginning of the Masechta of Chulin was that there's a lot of different talk and read about different mises about Achila. Obviously, many things revolving around Achila, but like we had in Vavam and Bey is the story with Rebbe and those white donkeys. So over there, the Gemara says that even though for the most part, most Mefarshim understand that to mean that b'negeya midida achila. It could be the Gemara even speaks that it's tafka b'midida achila. But over here, he's sitting with Tigdei Hadar, so why didn't he want to eat? So the Gemara says that it's like a taina on him. That's why Abaya says that it was like a taina on him. Kisura, so the Gemara continues like this. Besura le'achli kachli. In Surah, they did not eat udders altogether. But Pampadisa, achli kachli. Pampadisa, they did eat the udders. Meaning, what's the minig? So the minig in Surah was not to eat any udders at all, even roasted, and even if they were torn open, as the Gemara explained earlier, that there is a mahalach had a kasher. Now, maybe this had to do with the Gzeira of Rav, who was the Rosh Hashiva in Surah, who was geyser on all chal as a result of the people's ignorance. Although the incident that pushed him to make that gzeira had taken place in a tatlfush, but Rav may have been insistent that this gzeira take place in other areas as well, and all of Bavel. Now there's a girsa in Rashi that says Shashan Lechem Kechal Sha'aser, but Shashan Lechem Bebavel Sha'aser. In Pumpadisa, they followed the Ikra Halacha, and the Ikra Din is that it's going to be mutter, like the Gemara mentioned already a few times. Okay, so the Gemara Vaiter, another story. Rami Bar Tamri, who Rami Bar Dikuli of Pumpadisa. Rami Bar Tamri, who is Rami Bar Dikuli of Pumpadisa. Now, Tamarim are dates, and the Kalam are date trees. So he was Rami Bar Tamri and Rami Bar Dikuli. Okay, and the Mefarshim speak out this ha'ara. Ikla l'sura b'mal yom kippur. He visited Surah on Erev Yom Kippur. Afginu kuli amla kachlinu shadinu. Everyone brought out their udders and threw them out into the streets. Now, why did they do that? Meaning they shechted animals in preparation for the Suda of Erev Yom Kippur, and they threw out the udders of the animals with the minhag of Surah of not eating them. Now, we mentioned a while back in the Gemara that the Mishabur brings out minhag that when it comes to kaparis, that the the kishkas of the bird that you don't eat, you should throw it up of the chicken that you don't eat, you throw it up to the roof, and you let the birds eat it, because and this is the second incident that we're seeing in the Gemara, b'negeya kaparas, and even though we know that the Shulchan Aruch brings that it's a minhag Mayri, and it's not necessarily such a great thing, but I'll call upon him. It's a big shaila, and the Rama supports the minhag, so some of us do the minhag, but not for now. So Ozil Ihu Naktinu Achlinu, Rami Bar Tamri went and collected the chal that was thrown into the street, and he ate them. Asul Kamed Rav Chisda, they apprehended him and brought him before Rav Chisda. Amalei Rav Chisda said to him, why did you do this? Why did you go for a carrot from the local minhag? Amalei Rami Bar Tamri said, I'm from the place of Rav Yehuda, who allows eating the chal. Rav Yehuda was in Pumpadisa. Why didn't he just say it comes from Pumpadisa? You have to know, but that's what the Gemara says. Amalei Rav Chisda said to him, do not hold the Mishnah that we learned in the beginning of the fourth parak of Psachim that says, you oppose upon yourself the chumras of the place from which you left and the chumras of the place to which you are in now. The person who travels from one place to another and intends to return to his original place is still considered a member of his home community and is halachically bound by its customs. Nevertheless, while in the second place, he must follow the chumras of the second place as well. So Amalei, Rami Bar Tamri responded, I ate them outside the city limits. A foreigner with plans to return home is bound by the local minhag only when he's within the city's limits, when the people are where the people are commonly found, but not if he's in the field outside the city. Rav Chisda asked him, what did you do and how did you roast the udders, being that the area outside the town does not have wood? Amalei Rami Bar Tamri responded to Rav Chisda, but portani with great pits I found near the wine presses. So now he's trying to slug up the whole ma'isa. Maybe the grapes that you found were from Yayin Nesach, and they were also bahana. And we know about Yayin Nesach, we're not getting into it now. Amalei, he says, after 12 months, when they become mutter. The Chacham and the Mishnah hold that there's only moist pits of Avodah Zarah are treated as wine and are also bahana, but the dry pits are no longer considered wine and are mutter bahana. Says the Gemara explains in Avodah Zarah and Daf Lamed Daled, pits are considered dried after 12 months. Medilma de Gesel Havu. But still, how could you have used them? Perhaps they were of stolen goods, meaning the owners were keeping them for themselves and you're taking them constitutes gneva. Amalei, he said, the owners had definitely despaired retrieving them, for they were so old that nettles, things were already growing out of them. The fact that the owner allowed the pits to rot to the point that they turned into dust and were sprouting things growing from them, it indicates that the owner left them. So now the story gets even worse. Chazia did loy have a manach tefillin. Chazia did loy have a manach tefillin. Rav Chisda saw that Rami Bar Tamri was not wearing tefillin. Amalei, he said to him, my time lemenach the tefillin. Why are you not wearing tefillin? In the times of the Gemara, most people who wore tefillin all day. Today, because of gufnak or other reasons, we generally don't wear tefillin all day, although some people like to, some people do. So Amalei, I have a stomach problem, which was, one of the easy ways out of wearing tefillin. Rav Yehuda said that people with stomach problems are put from wearing tefillin because they constantly need to remove the tefillin in order to relieve themselves. Okay, so that he answered. Chazid level karami chuti. So if Chisda saw that Rami Bar Tamri wasn't wearing tzitzis on his four-cornered beged, Amalei, he said to him, my time less lachuti, why you don't have strings? Meaning, why don't you have tzitzis? Amalei, talish ulahi. Rami Bar Tamri said, the beged I'm wearing is borrowed. Vam Rav Yehuda. And Rav Yehuda says, Amid Beis, talish ula kol shleshim yom p'tur minat tzitzis. A borrowed beged is put from tzitzis the entire first 30 days. Minat Torah. A borrowed garment is forever put from tzitzis because the Torah says, which implies your beged and not on a beged borrowed from others. Nevertheless, since after 30 days the garment appears as if it's his, because people generally do not borrow begotten for this long, the Chacham regards that a person has to put tzitzis on his garment at the time, and Tosfos has lots to say about it. Adahachi, in the meantime, Aisiuhu lahu gavad leva mekafu v'imei. They brought before Rav Chisda's Bezdin a certain person who had not been honoring his father and his mother, meaning he had not been fulfilling the mitzvah of kabedas avicha v'simecha, which entails waiting on one's parents at mealtimes, dressing them, covering them, and escorting, like the Gemara says in Kedushin, the Flamet Aleph Amud Beis Kafsuhu. They tied him to a post in order to give him malchus. Although the Torah, there's no chiv malchus from a Torah for a person who's over in kibbut of aim. The Kaifenai said Sheyemi right Sani, so that's what they were doing over here. So Amaluhu Shavkuhu, Rami Tamri said to them, leave him alone. Leave him, let him go. The Tanya will into the Raisa, Kol mitzvah say Shemat and Schar B'tzida, any positive mitzvah whose reward is written in the Torah alongside its command, Ein Bezdin Shalamatim Usharon Aleha, Bezdin, the earthly courts, is not able to punish in regard to this Isser. Meaning, although the Bezdin are admonished to enforce the Torah and to whip those who refuse to obey its commands, they're not mechuyev to force those who refuse to perform a mitzvah who's matan schar b'tzida. Because the Torah says the matan schar b'tzida with the mitzvah to imply that the only punishment for not fulfilling this mitzvah is that the person will not be zeicha to the schar that we mentioned, and the mitzvah to honor one's parents is an example because it says laman yarichon yamecha. Amalei Rav Chisda said to him, Chasina lech techrifus tuva. I see that you're very sharp. I mean, he asked him all these questions, and he answered everything, and everything was very good thing. Meaning, I think that there's a kasha over here that we could ask. Meaning that Rav Chisda sees a person who he thinks he's doing shalakitin and starts trying to tell him what he's doing wrong. Seems like Rav Chisda is being very tough with him. So the kasha that people should ask is, why wasn't he being done the kafschos? If you see somebody doing something wrong, you don't necessarily have to be done the kafschos. You tell him he's doing something wrong. Sometimes yes, sometimes not, but it could be that Rav Chisda had the sense that this person was a ben Teda, and he was holding, so he wanted to give him musar, to be mechazik him, and every time he asked him a kasha, let him good geantwort. So over here, Amalei Rav Chisda said to him, Chazina lech lechrifis tuva. I see that you're very sharp. Amalei, so he says back, when a person is sharp, always has something to say. Yehaves ba'asur Rav Yehuda chvin lechorfoi. If you would be in Rav Yehuda city, I would show you my real charifus, meaning that so the question is, there's a few ha'aros over here, but he says that if I would be in Rav Yehuda city, meaning I'm being shy, this is me when I'm shy. What it would look like if I was in my place where I would normally be. Okay, so let's go through this Maisa one more time just to see what's going on. So you have Rami Bar Tamri, is the Talmud of Yehuda. He's so poor to the point that he had no food, and he has stomach problems, and he has clothing from other people that he was wearing, and he was reduced to collecting the udders that the people threw into the streets and roasted them outside the city on a fire made from rotted grape pits, in order to observe the mitzvah of eating on Erev Kippur. Which leads us to the following question. Why would Rami Bar Tamri not ask one of the Yiddish families in Surah if he could have a Suda together with them? Surely any of Surah's Yidden would be happy to feed a hungry guest in Erev Kippur, and would even be a schus for the Yom Adin. But from here we learn an important lesson. It's worth undergoing even extreme discomfort, just so as not to have to take from others, but do not take from other people, which is a fascinating musavart from Hagoyin Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. Okay, now the Gemara goes ad kan the Maisa, which is I think there's a lot more to speak out and a lot more to learn from the Maisa. I think that, and we sort of spoke this out already, but just to say it again, that Yehaves ba'asur Rav Yehuda chvin l'chorfoi, I mean, he says he was laying low. He didn't want to make a rash. Obviously he was a sort of, I don't want to say it's a klapt, but he was a nitzrach, and he was collecting food from the floor. As we mentioned before, that the Gemara says he was taking the chals from the floor. but it didn't help. It didn't help him financially in a sense. But the nakuda is that he's not in this place. He doesn't feel comfortable yet with everything and everybody over here. But when he's talking to Rav Chisda, so he was talking to him like a real Talmid Chacham, as Rav Chisda himself said. Okay, Zak the Gemara weiter. Now the Gemara is going to discuss the liver. So let's just be makdim a little bit that any blood that's absorbed in the meat of animals is mutter as long as it's not separated from the meat, which is referred to as dam evarim shlei pirish, organ blood that has not been separated. So it's mutter to eat a raw piece of meat even though it contains blood. Once, however, the blood left the meat and becomes dam evarim shapirish, organ blood that has separated, it's aser but with a lav, but it's not kares. So if a person cooks meat in a pot, before you take out the blood, it becomes aser. Because while you're cooking it, the blood comes out of the meat into the water, which then becomes basar dam evarim shapirish, and gets reabsorbed by the meat. So meat may not be cooked until the blood has been taken out. Now, there are two methods for extracting blood, either by roasting it or by salting it. When the meat is roasted over a fire, the fire takes the blood out of the meat, and when the meat is salted, the salt causes the meat to discharge its blood. Okay, this applies to most parts of the animal, but the liver, however, is so saturated with blood that salting it is ineffective in extracting all of it. So if the liver is cooked even after salting, it's certain that during the cooking process, more blood will emerge from the liver into the pot. So the Gemara is going to discuss the ramifications of this fact about cooking the liver in the pot by itself or together with other meat. So Amalei Abai Rav Safra, Abai said, Rav Safra kisalakta lahasam. When you ascend there, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, boy menayu kavda mountain bay. Ask them regarding the liver, how are you noyik with kashering it? Abai asked Rav Safra to find out the minig of Eretz Yisrael was matter to cook a liver in a pot or not. The point of Abaya's shaila was as follows. We know that liver is made up entirely of blood, and nevertheless it's mutter to eat, because like the Gemara said before. Now, does this mean that the blood of the liver is permitted entirely, even after the blood came out, or not? So, Kisalik, when he came to Yisrael, asked Rav Zrika, he found Rav Zrika, and he asked him, Rav Zrika said to him, Ana shalki lei l'Rabami v'achal. I myself stewed the liver for Rami, and he ate it. Shlika is a longer cooking than usual, and usually makes things very soft. So therefore, stewed makes better tides for the word than cooked. Nevertheless, at this point in the Gemara, the fact that the liver had been stewed rather than cooked is not relevant, and either way, it's good. So Kiosel Gabe, when Rav Safra returned to Abaya, he told him what Rav Zrika told him. Amalei Abaya said to him, with respect to the liver itself being also, I have no questions. I never meant to ask whether the liver may be cooked by itself, because it's pashut that the liver doesn't make itself also through the blood coming out and then reabsorbing it. Meaning, if the liver is in a pot by itself, who cares? That wasn't my question, b'chalal, because that's pashut l'chayra that you don't need to do anything with that, because it's not going to affect anything else. Kikam abayli l'meisa chaverta. The question was whether the liver can make another piece of non-liver piece of meat cooked together with it in the same pot, also because of the dam. So, what's different about answering the liver itself? Do you have no questions? And meaning, what's the difference if the blood comes out and goes into another piece of meat, or the blood comes out and goes back into the liver itself? Why should that be different? So Rav Safra didn't like Abaya's clarification of the question. It's non. We learned in the Mishnah regarding a liver, so Mishnah Terumas, Perik Yud, Eina Neseres, if the liver is cooked in a pot, it does not become asa through discharging its blood and then reabsorbing it. Since you are so sure that the liver itself is mutter, it must be that you are aware of the Mishnah Terumas that says it's beferish. So L'meisach Haberta Nami Leitiboilach. So then, if this is what the Mishnah says about it, then I don't have a question about it regarding answering the other piece of meat that goes into it also. The Tanan, we learned in the same Mishnah, Kaved Seres, Venin Seres, Mibnesha, he Pilatus Venin Bailas, liver answers other meat, but it doesn't make itself usher, because it spits out the blood, but doesn't absorb any blood. Rav Safra understood the Mishnah to mean that the liver makes other meat cooked together with it in the same pot also because the blood comes out of it. And then that blood is going to be absorbed by the other meat. So Rav Safra said to Abai that the very same Mishnah which Abai source for saying that the liver itself wasn't usher also says that the other pieces of meat in the pot are usher. So Okay. So over here they bring pshat why Rashi has to say that it's a Mishnah in Zroim. It appears that he wishes to explain how Rav Safra could be misupik whether or not Abaye had been aware of the Mishnah, with evidence from elsewhere in the Gemara that all Amayram were fluent in Mishnayos. Rashi answers that this is true only in regard to Mayid, Nashim, and Nezikin, which deal with the halachas that pertain even to Chutz La'aretz, and Kachim, although are not relevant after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, was universally studied by the Amayra, because the Chachamim teach that a person koleistik v'teres chatas, gilu chatas. So that's why we have Talmud Bavli on these Siddharim. However, Zram and Taurus were not studied as much because of their non-relevance nowadays outside Eretz Yisrael, which could explain also why there's no Talmud Bavli on these Mesichtas. Nevertheless, the Gemara is still difficult to understand, because granted that Rav Safra was unsure whether Abaye was aware of this mission or not, Rav Safra himself obviously was. Why then did he not immediately just tell him the Mishnah? V'tema, Rav Safra meikora ma'savish lehevi le'hamishna k'meishim v'sayf. Meaning, why didn't Rav Safra just tell him? Yeah, the Mishnah says, and answer the question. The stomach amitchila yideh the Mishnah is if you look at Zram v'tar so yishkurim b'fiyam. The Pirish Parak title, like the Gemara says in Shabbos, that Gabi Asi the Torah shet tishtachich mi Yisrael hanami mas nisin he. Right? Meaning, regardless of what the story is, why didn't he just answer the question right away and just tell him that it's a Mishnah in Parak Yod and Trumas? Right? Yerushalayim, Master Taisus answers the Gam B'tchila Hayayidei Mishnah that originally he knew the Mishnah also. Avla Yasavar Shabai have Mesupik B'Shluka and Neseres and Neseres. Lashon of the Mishnah over there doesn't speak about Shluka specifically. Kumvushelas the Pliga B'Tanai B'Samach, which is Machlekes Tanoim that the Gemara is going to bring soon. Mesupik Heich Halach, and it's Mesupik what's the din with the Shaluk, right? Malkein Hevilei Ram Reb Zrika V'Rabasi Shalkulei V'Achel. Meaning the reason why he didn't answer him directly from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is talking about liver, and the Mishnah says "Akaved seres vein and seres meishi peletas vein belas." But maybe that's in regular cooking, but with the shlika, it could be it's different. Could be it's not the same thing. Okay, seems to be more of the sugya. Zakti Gemara. Amalei said to Safra the Mahasam Akaved the Yisura. Maybe the Mishnah is dealing with the liver of an animal that's like a treifa. And the Mishnah is teaching that it makes the other meat cooked with it on account of the fat that imparts to them. But if one cooks the liver of a kosher animal with other meat, where the only grounds for answering the other meat is from the blood that comes out of it, what's the halacha? So with that, we will have to wait for Daf Kuf Yud Aleph to see what the rest of the story is here in the Gemara.